Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V the Grill Economist coming to you live on this edition of Hanging with Harley. We have with us the man of the hour. He needs no introduction. It's the one and only Harley Schlanger. You can find him over at LaRoucheOrganization.com, the LaRoucheOrganization.com, as well as the SchillerInstitute.com, the SchillerInstitute.com. Harley is the clarion voice of reason in this insane geopolitical world. And with that being said, Harley, welcome back, sir. How are you?
Well, thanks, V. It's good to be with you.
Always a pleasure to have you on. I mean, there are so many things happening, Harley. The insanity that is Ukraine is unraveling itself. The West is losing all credibility, as well as losing tens of thousands of armaments. And now the before the contract was even before the ink was dry on the contract and the deal of sending over tanks. Now they're talking about fighter jets and round we go. Where the insanity will stop, Harley, nobody knows.
Well, let me give your listeners the kind of breaking news stories they can get from Rogue News, but not from the mainstream media. There are a couple of things that have come up in the last 2 days. One is a statement issued by the NATO Military Committee chairman named Rob Bauer, who told Portuguese television, and I'm sure this didn't make it to the U.S. television, that NATO is prepared for a, quote, direct confrontation with Russia, unquote. And he said the problem is that NATO has lost its monopoly on military initiative. And he added, the fact that your enemy has better weapons is not the problem of the enemy. That is your problem. Now, of course, that was the issue that was discussed at the meetings that were taking place in Germany at Ramstein that led to the shipment of the tanks, or the agreement to ship tanks. Whether they ever get there or not is another question. Now, then we have a January 27th memo from Air Force General Mike Minahan to Air Force commanders. He's basically in charge of the Air Mobility Command. Yeah. And he said that my gut tells me we will fight China in 2025. Wow. And he said, I hope I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like. Now, of course, others are saying that 2027, 2026, but he's moving it up to 2025. Now, this is a guy who said recently that it's necessary to upgrade the lethal quality of the U.S. military. He said, lethality matters most. When you can kill your enemy, every part of your life is better. Your food tastes better. Your marriage is stronger. So
this man is sick. Who is this guy?
He's like Jack Ripper, that you got to watch out for your bodily essence being drained.
It's
if
disgusting.
You kill the enemy better, it'll make your sex life improve.
Oh, my God.
Where do we get guys like this?
Well, it can only, creatures like this are only born and they're gestated within the underbellies of the American think tanks that are they themselves are a bunch of morons and idiots wrapped in stupidity. That's where you find disgusting psychopaths like this idiot who's never won a war in his life, has no idea of combined arms warfare, and he's talking nonsense. And it beleaguers me, Harley. It beleaguers me that you have a country that has no industrial production talking about warfare like they're going to do something. It's incredible.
Well, and then let's just add one more, which is a new report from the Rand Corporation. Now, remember, in 2019, they put out a report called Extending Russia, Competing from Advantageous Ground. And this was essentially laying out a strategy for using Ukraine to weaken Russia.
Sure.
And of course, Rand
has worked out well for them.
Well, Rand is a very significant part of the military-industrial think tank complex. Yeah. Now, their new report is putting on the brakes a little bit. What they say, this new one just came out, and it's titled Avoiding a Long War, U.S. Policy and the Trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine Conflict. And it says that, well, maybe a long war in Ukraine is not so much in U.S. interests. They say U.S. interests would be best served by avoiding a protracted conflict. And they say among the risks are involved the possibility of a nuclear war. Well, yeah, no kidding. But then they say, why is it that we have to avoid a long war in Ukraine? Because we have to prepare for war with China.
Oh yeah. I mean,
So
this is the funny thing about this, right? Russia manufactures over 800 tanks per year, and they could gear it up to make about 1,500 tanks per year. The United States makes the vaunted piece of junk, turbine engine powered, bloated pig of a tank called the M1A1 and the M1A2 Abrams, which we make around 200 tanks per year. And if we really try really extra hard, Harley, we can get up to 250 tanks a year. Russia makes more tanks than all of NATO and the West combined. Now, these idiots can barely hang on to this, but watch this, Harley. And they want to talk about China? They want to talk about the industrial might of China.
Well, and you also have, of course, while this was being said by these American officials, the British have been on record for some time talking about preparing for war against Russia alongside their NATO allies. And the most recent call, British General Patrick Sanders, who's the head of the British Army, said, we have to be prepared to fight Russia. Yeah. But to do so, we need a mobilization and modernization of the army. Well, they might also consider we need some troops in the army. They're down to under 80,000 troops. And a Russian commentator said the other day, the British could not bring order in case of a strike in the United Kingdom. How the hell are they going to win a war?
Exactly.
And you see the conflicted, corrupt Boris Johnson now coming out with a comment saying that Putin threatened to kill him. Now, I don't. It's true. He came out and said Putin told him that he had a missile that was going to hit him. Putin didn't waste a missile on Boris Johnson.
Oh, this is too good.
Now, I've been joking.
I think most Britons would want that. They'd want to see the haircut looking for a brain. This moron right here, right? I'm sure they would love to see this guy get hit by a missile.
Well, I think the reason Boris Johnson goes to Kiev so much is he's preparing his papers to emigrate there because of all the corruption cases against him in the United Kingdom.
And the prostitution is cheap. That's what it is.
Well, and you know, I had a contact who was at Davos, and he said, in spite of the champagne, the caviar, and the $3,000 a night hookers, in spite of that, they were very depressed during the whole conference.
Of course, these are disgusting people.
Well, he said the two words you heard more than any other at Davos were not Ukraine and tanks, but de-dollarization and deglobalization.
Yep, then that's what they said.
That's what's haunting them. And you see this with Brazil and Argentina reaching an agreement to move toward a common currency for South America.
Yep.
You see it with the Russian foreign minister meeting with the Pakistani foreign minister today, talking about energy cooperation on Afghanistan. And in the background is discussion about what could Russia do to facilitate a rapprochement between India and Pakistan, along with China. So we're seeing this new geometry, this new strategic architecture coming into place. Now, I'm sure Biden doesn't see it, but the people who advise him definitely see it, and that's what they're afraid of. But they realize now they have a losing hand in Ukraine. And the way we know this is the shakeups going on inside the Ukrainian government. These are mostly for show. I mean, they're about to get $17 billion from the International Monetary Fund, on top of all the money being shoveled their way by the United States and NATO. And they've never done a thing to clean up the corruption since Biden organized to get their chief prosecutor looking into Burisma, kicked out back in 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
So they're doing a showcase that they're moving in on corruption. But while they're doing this, the head of the GRU, which is military intelligence in Ukraine, admitted that it was the SBU, the security services of Ukraine, who assassinated the chief negotiator from Ukraine at the conference going on in Belarus in March of 2022, when the Russians and the Ukrainians were negotiating. He was pulled out of his car and assassinated by the SBU. And the GRU head who admitted this said, well, they now say that there was mistaken intelligence that he was working with Russia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
So, the attempt to clean up their act can only work with imbeciles in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. intelligence community, where intelligence is an oxymoronic statement.
It's a euphemism. That's what it is. It's incredible to witness this. I mean, this is what makes it so dangerous. I always say this, Harley. Do not be afraid of what Western elitists can do, because they're not capable of doing anything. These are some of the most incompetent people out there, from the bottom to the topmost stone. But be afraid of what they're capable of breaking. Be afraid of the damage and the destruction that they cause. I mean, their stupidity and hubris.
Well, you're right. And I had an interesting battle with someone on my Facebook page today where he was saying, how can you call these guys stupid? They're going with the program they designed. And I said, they're stupid because they think it might succeed. They're stupid because they're ignoring the fact that if Americans ever fully wake up, they're going to be put in prison, because they're using the U.S. government and the willingness of the people not to act to carry out corrupt and illegal actions all over the world.
Yep.
And at the point at which we get a shift, maybe it'll come before a crash, maybe it'll take a crash to bring it on. But at some point, the stupidity of this so-called elite will be clear. I don't care how many plans they have that they lay out at the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and Davos. Their plans are idiotic. They're based on the idea that human beings are willing to be manipulated into killing each other for the benefit of this small group of oligarchs.
Correct.
And it's my profound belief, and maybe I'm the one who is stupid for believing this, but it's my belief that we as human beings have a different quality of creative capability that can be mobilized and inspired to action. And that's what we have to do, inspire our fellow citizens who are complaining and grumpy and trying to hide in their social media and Super Bowl betting and things of that sort. Inspire them to recognize that there's a higher issue at stake here, which is the nature of man and our immortality.
Yep. Very well said. Harley, what else is on your radar?
Well, I'm delighted to see people finally figuring out that the so-called Green Party of Germany is nothing but a bunch of war hawks acting on behalf of Chatham House and the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah,
Baerbock's statement where she said, we're at war with Russia, which in a normal country would have led to her being sacked, thrown out immediately.
Right.
Instead, they're saying, well, she didn't really mean what she said. Of course she meant what she said. She was one of the people pushing for sending the tanks. She may not know the implications of what she's doing. Obviously, she's a believer in the Greta Thunberg cult. But what's happening in Germany is we're seeing a continued erosion of the physical economy of the country. And Schultz and his people are patting themselves on the back saying, see, we haven't had a fuel emergency yet. Well, actually, it's gone from tense, the categories they have is tense to dangerous. That is moving toward dangerously low on the amount of fuel that's needed to run the economy. The industrial economy of Germany has reduced its fuel consumption by 14% this year. Instead of congratulating themselves for that, they ought to be looking at horror by watching the German firms, the engineering firms, the machine tool firms that are looking to pack up and move to other countries, because this is the German economy that's being shrunk. And without these machine tool and auto sector and so on, Germany becomes a sort of a poor sister for the other NATO countries, which rely on speculative quantitative easing and looting to survive. and it won't work. It's not going to last much longer.
Look at what Germany. Look at Baerbock, Annalena Baerbock, the trampoline artist. Okay, that's what she's famous for. For those that don't know, she's famous for bouncing on a trampoline, guys. And what's her education in, Harley? Political
London
science.
School of Economics.
Yep, political science, public law, and she did a 1-year master course in the London School of Economics, all of which are just fake, fraudulent degrees, especially the political science and the public law. Fake, fraudulent degrees. And this idiot, this trampoline gymnast who bounces on a trampoline all day, that's her claim to fame, okay, has no concept of warfare. None whatsoever.
Don't forget her other famous statement where she said, "We're going to stick with Ukraine as long as it takes, no matter what my German voters think."
Oh yeah, so loving, so much about what happened.
Well, so
in
much,
Germany,
so much
Harley?
of a Democrat, huh?
Harley, let me ask you this: what happened in Germany? Like, why are they? I've never met a group of people that hate themselves so much. They're miserable. What happened?
Well, post World War II,
yep,
there was a project that was run by several groups out of London, which was based on using German war guilt to commit the people, to convince the population that being proud of your nation is a precondition for becoming a Nazi.
Yep.
That nationalism will become a Nazi policy. This is, of course, what they're throwing at the people in the United States who are supporting Trump, that if you're for national sovereignty, protecting the resources and industry of the nation, ultimately it will become Nazism, right-wing extremism, and so on. So you had the Frankfurt School and you had several other institutions which literally brainwashed the German population that pride in one's nation, not heritage, not religion or race, but pride in a nation, is dangerous for humanity and is a cause for war. And then on top of that, you station 100,000 or so troops in the country, French troops, German troops, and American troops. And you use the Cold War as a scare tactic. Without the American, British, and French troops, Germany would be overrun by the communist hordes from the East. And so the prosperity that emerged in Germany after the war was based on a return to the American system economic policies under Adenauer, the protectionism of the industry, cheap credit for industry and investment in agriculture and science and technology, revival of German science and engineering. But what they didn't revive was the better part of German culture, which was the Weimar classical period from the late 18th, early 19th century of Schiller, Goethe, Beethoven, Heine, and so on. Instead, they introduced modernism, abstraction, the idea that relativism, that there's no higher good, no principles worth fighting for. And so therefore, they created a generation of 68ers who are only interested in their own pleasure, not so different from our 68ers in the United States. And so that's where green ideology comes from. That's where the rock, sex, drug counterculture emerged. In Germany, it introduced a profound cultural pessimism and the idea that if you live for some higher purpose, you're a sucker. Just live to suck everything out that you can get while you're alive and then try and take it to the grave with you because there's nothing else. And so, as Lavrov said, Germany and Western Europe are in the post-Christian era. Yes. They have no sense of a higher purpose or an obligation to past and future generations. And you see it in the soulless figures such as Habeck, the economics minister, or Baerbock, or Lindner, the head of the Free Democratic Party, or Schultz. Schultz is not an idiot, but he's acting as a completely controlled puppet. Yeah. And what it shows is that Germany is still an occupied nation.
Yep.
And there are many people in Germany who don't like this and would like to change it.
Yeah, but they'll be called Nazi.
Well, they're attacked for that.
Yeah.
They just issued a fine and a jail term against someone who stood in front of the Soviet War Memorial in Berlin and said we shouldn't be going to war with Russia, and they found him guilty of I don't know if it was treason. It was lesser charge than treason, but it's definitely to send out a warning signal that you'd better not speak against the government policy, or you too could go to jail and be fined.
Yep. Yeah, it's incredible, and that is definitely something that's coming out of the heart of the city of London, right there. That whole censorship, that whole sending the message to people. I mean, we have people that are political prisoners all over the world because of this nonsense. It's incredible, Harley.
Well, unless we change it, we're going to have a lot more, because more people are starting to ask the right kinds of questions. And, you have to be careful the way you pose them these days. Yeah. But the truth has to stand on its own. And if what I'm saying is so obviously false and part of a conspiracy theory, prove it. Show me. And instead of doing that, what they do is just label you a Putin puppet or a conspiracy theorist, and then issue threats against you. Yeah,
exactly. Very well said. Harley Schlanger, the man, the myth, the legend himself. Harley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, V, let me just finish by saying that this Saturday beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we have another Schiller Institute conference, The Age of Reason or the Annihilation of Humanity. We'll have a number of speakers, very interesting speakers, 2 panels. The registration is on the schillerinstitute.com website, and I think it would be quite interesting for all of your viewers to participate in one of our conferences if you haven't done so. There are people from the Rogue News audience who regularly log on to our site and communicate with me, but we need to build it, just as you need to build your viewers. So I would encourage people to share the registration form and get people off their rear ends and onto the streets.
Very well said. And with that being said, folks, we are at the end of the show. Harley, thank you so much for joining us. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.